Hey there, blue collar fans. I'm Mustache Mike, and this is my corner of the workshop. This week, we will finish up the introduction to scroll saw basics with table and blade alignment, and then we're going to follow that up with tension, speed, and feed. I'm excited already. We'll also have another around the corner tip of the week. So, pull up a plank, sit down, and enjoy yourself. Okay, first let's talk about blade and table alignment. First you got to install a blade to make any cut. And always remember with a scroll saw the teeth have to point down. Blade clamps vary as we discuss in another episode. And always remember most broken blades result from a misalignment of the blades in the clamp. Obviously you can notice here on this wood table saw model that I made the gross alignment of the blade and the blade clamp. And this was done intentionally to illustrate the point that this alignment has to be done right. Now it's going to vary from saw to saw with the clamping mechanism. And of course it's always good to consult the owner's manual on a particular saw for their recommendations on clamp down. But if this is not right, when we get to the point of lining up the table, it's never going to come out right. Now here's where the major alignment usually occurs as we look down underneath the table of the saw. It's in this bottom clamp. Generally you're always looking down from the top through the hole in the table, and it's hard on most saws to see this bottom clamp. So we have to be very careful down here that that clamp is set up right. Now the first big mistake that almost everybody makes is assuming that when your table tilt scale reads 0, that you're going to be cutting perfect 90-degree cuts on that table. As my grandkids would say, yeah, right, which actually means you're wrong, and which I guess meant in my day, no. Please, always check the table. And here's 2 good ways to check that alignment. The first way you can check for table squareness, again with a properly mounted and aligned blade, is to use one of these little 2 or 3 inch squares. They're real handy. You can slide it up against the blade. Of course, you'd want to do that from both sides and check for squareness and make adjustments as necessary. Now, the second way you can check for table squareness is to actually make a cut in a piece of wood. And you'll come up with a kerf, of course, and then turn the wood over. And if it fits back into the kerf perfectly, you know that your table is square. If it's one way or the other, we'll know which direction we'll have to slant the table. Now, here's an issue that isn't easy to resolve. Oh, you're going to hear when it comes to the proper tension, just tighten the blade until it makes a high C note when you pluck the blade. Now, this method works really great if you just happen to have a pitch pipe or, say, a baby grand in your workshop. And good luck if you're tone deaf from years of running your power equipment without hearing protection like me. So obviously it's just going to take some trial and error. You're going to break a few blades to find that sweet spot. So go ahead and pretend you're a scroll saw guitar hero and strum that blade. And if you can tell the difference between a high C and a B flat, let me tell you, you're bored feet ahead of me. Smaller blades require less tension than bigger ones. And if your tension is not tight enough, what's going to happen is your blade's going to drift. You're going to follow the grain of the wood, and you'll make tight corners and curves a real pain in the old pine. Flexing will also cause your cuts to be out of square. More so at the top of the cut, which is, let me tell you, a real bummer when you're stack cutting and you lose part of the design on one of your pieces. How about blade speed? Everybody today has got an opinion on blade speed. But let me tell you as an expert, it's not as important as the feed rate, which we'll cover shortly. I have but two basic rules, of which I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of differences in opinion. First rule, slow speed on most plastics and metal. Why? Because of material burn and remelt on plastic and blade overheating on metal cuts. How about my second rule? Fast on everything else, or as Stumpy would say, put some foot in it. Why? Well, let me ask you this question. Have you ever seen a variable speed table saw or bandsaw? Why not? Because it's all about tooth type and spacing, and more about how fast you feed the material into the blade. Generally, the slower the feed rate, the finer the cut. And often feed rate is regulated by two additional aspects, what you see and what you hear. So obviously, if you're seeing the blade bend while you're cutting, you hear the motor bog down, or there's an excessive amount of tear out, then you know that your feed rate is too high. Oh, and if you smell or see a little smoke, you know you're aggressive as well. So in this actual wood cut, we see the results of a slow feed rate, a medium feed rate, and obviously a very fast feed rate. We also see no tear out, a little bit, and then quite a lot of tear out when your feed rate is way too fast for the material. Hardwoods will feed usually different from softwoods, especially some of those exotic hardwoods used in intarsia products. They can even dull your blade. And blade design and how many teeth per inch will always affect the cutting rate. What it comes down to, fellow woodworkers, is you gotta practice. You gotta cut, cut, cut. Now here's a nice tip. Remember when we were talking about alignment of blades? Sometimes when you're working with these real small blades like 2/0 and 3/0, you just can't look at them and tell them which way the teeth are going. Here's a little tip. Take the blade and run your finger up and down. Your fingers are very sensitive and you can easily tell which direction the teeth are moving at a given time. Another good thing about the feel is if you mix your blades up, you can tell, this one is a reverse tooth, this one is a skip tooth, all by feeling the hands. Here's the second tip. When you break a blade, it can tell you a lot. If the blade breaks at the top, usually that top clamp is misaligned. Breaks at the bottom, usually something was wrong with the bottom clamp. Now if you get a breakage in the center, that usually means your tension was okay, but you're being way too aggressive with the feed rate. So keep these things in mind as you do your scroll sawing. So if your saw is square and your blade is mounted and adjusted right, you should be able to do this. Well, scroll sawers, that's about it for this episode. Next time we get together, we're going to actually do some cutting projects. Along with that, we'll learn some different cuts, project layout, and even wood selection. So we'd like to say see you soon from all of us here at Blue Collar Woodworking Land. And always remember, you can trust old Mustache Mike, because I would never pull your stash.